The nylon straps dug sharply into my wrists, a desperate, pathetic solution to a humiliating problem. I tied myself to the cold iron bed frame to stop my treacherous body from sleepwalking into my alpha roommate's room. It was supposed to be foolproof. I'd wake up bruised maybe, but with my dignity strictly intact. I didn't plan on the knot slipping into a blood-restricting bind, and I definitely didn't plan on my bedroom door creaking open at 3 in the morning, revealing a shadow in the hallway who was entirely done pretending he didn't want me. It happened for the third time on a Tuesday. I woke up with my face pressed against a pillow that didn't belong to me, breathing in a scent that wasn't mine. It was a harsh, terrifying jolt from unconsciousness to hyper-awareness. The fabric beneath my cheek was cheap cotton smelling faintly of industrial laundry detergent, stale coffee, and the sharp, unmistakable ozone and cedar grounding of an alpha. Specifically, haze. I froze. My eyes snapped open in the dim light of his bedroom. The digital clock on his nightstand glared a menacing 4:12 a.m. in red neon. Next to me, taking up 3/4 of the mattress, Hayes was sprawled on his stomach. One of his heavily veined arms was draped carelessly over the blankets, inches from my hip. His breathing was slow, a deep rhythmic rumble that rattled his chest. I didn't breathe. I barely let my heart beat. The shame wasn't a sudden wash. It was a slow, agonizing drip. I was a 26-year-old Omega who meticulously managed his cycles, took suppressants that tasted like chalk, and caused migraines, and paid his half of the rent exactly 3 days early every month. I prided myself on control. But the suppressants were failing, or my stress levels from the impending architectural firm layoffs were spiking my cortisol, triggering a biological fail-safe I couldn't conscious override. My body, sensing a preheat hormonal dip and a lack of a bonded mate, was piloting me out of my own bed while I slept, marching me down the hall and curling me up at the feet of the nearest alpha. It was pathetic. It was a biological cliché that made me want to peel my own skin off. I moved with agonizing slowness. I slid my legs toward the edge of the mattress, testing the weight shift. The springs gave a muted groan. Hayes shifted, grumbling something incoherent into the mattress. His hand twitched, the fingers curling inward. I held my breath until my lungs burned. When his breathing leveled out again, I slid off the bed entirely, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. I didn't look back. I slipped out his door, pulling it shut until the latch clicked with the softest metallic snick, and practically ran to my own room. Once inside, I leaned against my closed door and slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. My pulse thudded in my ears. My own bed looked cold and uninviting, a tangle of sheets I had clearly kicked off hours ago. The room smelled sterile. Bleach and my own muted, suppressant-dulled scent of bitter almond. This had to stop. The first time it happened, I convinced myself it was a fluke, a weird side effect of mixing melatonin with a late-night beer. I'd woken up on the floor next to his bed and snuck out before dawn. The second time I woke up at the foot of his mattress. Today I was practically sharing his pillow. Hayes wasn't a bad guy, but he was guarded. He worked as a mechanic for a heavy machinery outfit, coming home with grease permanently embedded in his knuckles and a quiet, brooding exhaustion that left little room for small talk. We were roommates of convenience, 2 guys splitting a 2-bedroom apartment in a city that charged exorbitant prices for the privilege of not having a window facing a brick wall. We had a system. We shared the fridge, avoided each other on Sunday mornings, and respected the boundaries. If he woke up and found me nesting in his bed, it wouldn't just cross a boundary. It would obliterate the lease. He would look at me with that same mixture of pity and disgust that alphas always reserve for omegas, who couldn't keep their biology in check. He'd think I was offering myself up. He'd think I wanted him. The worst part was the small, traitorous voice in the back of my skull whispering that maybe my body knew exactly what it wanted. I crushed that thought immediately. I needed a practical solution. Locking my door hadn't worked. Apparently, sleepwalking Ian was perfectly capable of turning a deadbolt. Pushing a chair under the doorknob was a fire hazard, and frankly, I'd probably just move it in my sleep anyway. I needed to be physically anchored. At 8 a.m., I was standing in the aisles of a hardware store 3 blocks away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everything a sickly yellow cast. I bypassed the chains and padlocks, too loud, too complicated, and stopped in the sporting goods and camping section. My eyes landed on a set of heavy-duty nylon cargo straps. They were designed for tying down kayaks and lumber to roof racks. They had heavy metal cam buckles that clamped down on the webbing. One-way friction. You could pull them tight with one hand, but releasing them required pressing down hard on a metal lever. I picked up 2 packs. They were black utilitarian and strong enough to hold 300 pounds of static weight. Perfect. The cashier barely looked at me when I paid. He bagged the straps along with a roll of duct tape I bought just to make the purchase look less deranged. I walked home in the gray morning drizzle, the plastic bag swinging against my leg. Every step felt like a heavy concession to a reality I hated. I was a modern man living in a modern city, but I was still chained to an endocrine system that treated me like a cave dweller. Tonight I was going to make that chain literal. Hayes was in the kitchen when I got back. He was leaning against the counter wearing faded gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt that stretched taut across his shoulders. He was drinking coffee black from a chipped mug, staring blankly out the small window above the sink. "Morning." He grunted, his voice still thick with sleep. "Hey," I muttered, keeping my head down. I clutched the plastic bag tightly. He tracked my movement as I walked toward the hallway. I felt the weight of his gaze. It wasn't predatory, it was just heavy. Hayes had a way of looking at people like he was trying to figure out how their engine ran. "You sleep okay?" he asked suddenly. I stopped. The blood drained from my face. Did he know? Did he wake up and see me leaving fine? I lied smoothly, forcing myself to turn and look at him. "Why?" He took a slow sip of his coffee. His eyes, a pale, washed-out green, studied my face. "Nothing. Just heard you moving around early. Floorboards in the hall squeak." "Yeah, needed water." "Right." He looked down at his mug, then back up. "You look tired, Ian." "Long week," I said. It wasn't a complete lie. "Deadlines." Don't burn out," he advised softly. It was the most he'd said to me in 3 days. He set the mug down and ran a hand through his dark, messy hair. "I'm pulling a double shift today. Won't be back until midnight. Don't wait up." "I never do," I said, aiming for casual, but landing somewhere near defensive. He gave a half shrug, turning back to the sink. The conversation was over. I retreated to my room and locked the door. I threw the plastic bag onto the mattress and ripped the packaging apart. The nylon straps were stiff and smelled fiercely of factory chemicals. I spent the next hour rigging the bed. My frame was an old cast iron thing I'd found at a vintage market years ago. Heavy, immovable. I looped the first strap around the thick iron spindle on the left side of the headboard, threading the tail through the metal cam buckle and pulling it tight until it locked against the metal. I left a loop dangling just large enough to slip my hand through. I repeated the process on the right side. I sat on the edge of the mattress staring at my handiwork. It looked like a medieval torture device. A deep, hollow sense of humiliation settled in my chest. I tested it. I lay back on the pillows and slipped my left wrist through the loop. I used my right hand to pull the tail of the strap. The nylon zipped through the buckle, tightening securely around my wrist. It bit into the skin. I yanked my arm upward. The strap held firm, the iron bed frame rattling slightly against the wall. To release it, I had to reach over with my free hand, press the metal lever on the buckle, and pull the webbing backward. It took some practice to figure out how to secure the second wrist. I had to pull the strap tight using my teeth to grip the nylon tail, while my right wrist was already in the loop. It was awkward demeaning and entirely effective. Once both wrists were pulled tight, I couldn't reach the release levers. I was pinned flat on my back, my arms spread-eagled and anchored to the iron. I spent a few minutes fighting it just to be sure. I twisted my wrists, yanked my arms, arched my back. The nylon held. The friction burn started immediately turning my skin red. Good, I thought bitterly. Let it hurt. Pain wakes you up. I released myself, rubbing the red marks on my wrists. The plan was set. All I had to do was survive the night. The day dragged. I worked on my laptop drafting floor plans for a commercial complex that I cared absolutely nothing about. The apartment was dead quiet without Hayes. Usually I appreciated the solitude. Today the silence felt oppressive, heavy with the anticipation of what I was about to do to myself. By 11 p.m. exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on my eyelids. I brushed my teeth, changed into a worn-out t-shirt and boxers, and stood beside my bed. The black straps hung limply from the headboard. I turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the weak amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. I lay down. The mattress felt uncomfortably firm. I slipped my left wrist into the loop and pulled the tail with my right hand until the nylon squeezed my skin. I took a shaky breath, then slipped my right wrist into the other loop. I leaned my head forward, caught the tail of the second strap in my teeth, and yanked my head back. The strap zipped tight, the buckle locked. I dropped the nylon from my mouth and let my head fall back onto the pillow. I tested the restraints one last time. Both arms pulled taut. No give. No escape. I stared up at the ceiling, feeling incredibly stupid. My shoulders ached from the unnatural angle. The nylon was coarse against my pulse points. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to release the locks, to curl up on my side, to seek warmth and comfort, to seek him. No, I whispered to the empty room. I closed my eyes. I focused on the rhythm of my breathing. In, out. I tried to ignore the phantom scent of cedar and ozone that seemed to linger in my memory, teasing my suppressed biology. I fought the tension in my muscles, forcing my limbs to go limp. Sleep did not come easy. It dragged me down slowly, a murky, restless descent. The last thing I remembered before unconsciousness took me was the sound of the front door unlocking down the hall, signaling Hayes's return. I was drowning. The dream was suffocating and dark. I was walking through a thick, freezing fog, searching for a heat source. I could smell it just out of reach, a rich, grounding campfire scent. My bones ached with cold. I reached out to grab it, but something caught my arms. Vines. Thick black vines wrapping around my wrists, pulling me backward into the ice. I fought them. I twisted and pulled, screaming without making a sound. The vines only dug deeper, cutting into my flesh, burning like fire. Let go. I gasped in the dream. I jolted awake. It wasn't a vine. It was the nylon. I was thrashing on the bed, covered in a cold, slick sweat. The room was pitch black. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled my arms instinctively, trying to curl inward, but the restraint snapped tight. The sudden jolt sent a sharp, agonizing spike of pain through my shoulders. I cried out a pathetic choked sound and fell back onto the mattress. Panic, raw and unadulterated, flooded my system. The knots had slipped. While I was thrashing in my sleep, trying to get up and walk down the hall, I had twisted my arms. The constant pulling had forced the nylon deeper into the cam buckles, tightening the loops around my wrists, far beyond what I had initially set. I couldn't feel my fingers on my right hand. A dull, throbbing numbness was creeping up my forearm. The strap was cutting off my circulation. Fuck! I breathed, my voice shaking. I tried to pull my left hand toward the right buckle to press the release lever. The strap on the left allowed for maybe 2 inches of slack. It wasn't enough. My fingers clawed empty air a full foot away from the locking mechanism. I tried to use my teeth again. I arched my back, lifting my chest off the mattress, stretching my neck as far as it would go toward my right wrist. My teeth grazed the nylon tail, but I couldn't get a grip. My neck cramped violently, and I collapsed back down panting. The pain in my right wrist was shifting from a dull throb to a sharp, burning agony. The nylon was biting directly into the tendons. Calm down, I told myself. Think. I twisted my body sideways, hoping to find an angle, some sliver of leverage. The iron bed frame groaned loudly in protest, the metal joints screeching against the floorboards. I ignored the noise, kicking my legs and twisting my hips, trying to slide my body up the mattress to give the straps more slack. It was useless. The angle was all wrong. I was pinned. God damn it! I hissed, frustration and fear mixing into a toxic cocktail. I yanked both arms as hard as I could, hoping the buckles were defective. The metal only bit harder. The bed frame screeched again, a loud, violent sound in the silent apartment. I stopped moving, chest-heaving tears of absolute humiliation pricking the corners of my eyes. I was trapped, in my own bed, by my own hand. My right hand was completely numb now, a heavy dead weight attached to a burning wrist. If I stayed like this until morning, I was going to do permanent nerve damage. I had to call for help. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I had to call Hayes. I swallowed the lump of pride in my throat. I opened my mouth to shout his name, but my voice failed. What would I even say? Hey, roommate, I tied myself to the bed because I want to sleep with you so badly. My unconscious body won't stop trying to break into your room. Can you come cut me loose? Before I could force the words out, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. They weren't casual. They were fast, urgent. I froze, the breath catching in my lungs. A heavy knock rattled my bedroom door. Ian. Hayes's voice. It was low, rough, and laced with sleep, but there was an edge to it, the edge of an alpha who heard distress in his territory. I didn't answer. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the floor would open up and swallow me whole. Ian, I heard a crash. You all right in there? The doorknob rattled. It's locked, I thought desperately. He can't come in. Ian, answer me. The tone shifted. The casual roommate demeanor dropped instantly. A heavy, commanding resonance bled into his voice. It wasn't a request anymore. I'm fine. I finally managed to choke out. My voice sounded weak, thinned out by pain and panic. Just knocked something over. There was a beat of silence. I prayed he would buy it and walk away. You're lying, Hayes stated flatly through the wood. Your heart rate is through the roof. I can smell the panic sweating out of you from out here. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter. Damn his senses. Damn my biology. Go back to bed, Hayes. Seriously, I'm fine. I'm coming in. No, the door's locked. I yelled, pulling uselessly at the restraints again. Ian, he warned, his voice dropping an octave. Move away from the door. I'm not near the door. Just leave me alone. There was a heavy sigh followed by the sound of a shoulder hitting wood. The apartment building was old. The door frames were cheap pine. It didn't take much. On the second shove, the lock splintered with a sharp crack, and the door swung open, hitting the wall. The hallway light spilled into my room, cutting a harsh, bright rectangle across the floor and illuminating the bed. Hayes stood in the doorway. He was wearing the same gray sweatpants from this morning, shirtless, his chest rising and falling from the exertion of breaking the door. His hair was a mess. His eyes locked onto me immediately. He didn't speak. He just stared. I was laid out flat on my back, my arms pulled taut in a V shape above my head, the black nylon stark against my pale skin and the white sheets. My t-shirt was twisted around my ribs from thrashing, and my chest was heaving. The silence stretched. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. I couldn't look at his face. I turned my head away, staring at the wall, waiting for the disgust, waiting for the awkward, horrifying realization to dawn on him. I waited for him to ask what the hell kind of freak show I was running in my bedroom. He didn't ask. Hayes stepped into the room. He didn't walk. He stalked. His movements were slow, deliberate, and entirely silent. The air in the room seemed to change, growing dense. The sterile smell of my room was instantly overpowered by the sudden sharp spike of his scent cedar ozone and something darker, richer, something protective. He stopped at the side of the bed. I felt the mattress dip as he leaned over me. "What did you do?" he asked. His voice was a bare whisper, rough as sandpaper. Don't... I choked out a tear, finally escaping and tracking hotly down my temple. "Just don't look at me. Unhook the right one. I can't feel my hand." Hayes's gaze snapped from my face to my right wrist. He saw the angry, bruised purple flesh bulging against the black nylon, the strap cutting deep into the tendon. A low vibrating sound resonated from his chest. A growl. It wasn't aggressive toward me. It was aimed at the restraint. He didn't bother with the metal release lever. He reached down his large, calloused hands, gripping the heavy nylon webbing on either side of the buckle. The muscles in his forearms bunched cords of steel standing out under his skin. He pulled. The heavy-duty webbing, rated for 300 pounds, creaked. The metal buckle groaned, the teeth biting uselessly into the fabric, before the sheer brute force of an alpha's adrenaline tore the mechanism apart. The metal snapped with a sharp pain, and the strap went slack. My arm dropped to the mattress like a lead weight. I gasped as the blood rushed back into my hand, 1,000 agonizing needles exploding in my fingertips. I curled into a tight ball on my side, cradling my right arm against my chest, waiting for him to break the left one. He didn't. Instead, I felt a heavy warm weight settle on the edge of the mattress behind me. Hayes sat down. He reached out his large hand, gently wrapping around my left wrist directly over the red friction burns. His thumb brushed against my racing pulse. With a soft click, he pressed the release lever on the left buckle. The strap loosened, and I pulled my arm free, pulling both knees to my chest. I kept my back to him, shaking. "Ian," Hayes said softly. The anger was gone from his voice. The command was gone. What was left was a terrifying, quiet vulnerability. "Why?" "Because," I ground out my voice, thick with unshed tears, "I'm sick of waking up in your bed." The silence that followed my confession was heavy enough to crack the floorboards. I kept my face buried in my knees, listening to the agonizingly slow rhythm of Hayes's breathing behind me. I had just handed him the ultimate pathetic truth. I was a biological stereotype, a walking cliché who had to strap himself to furniture just to avoid throwing himself at his roommate. I expected the mattress to shift. I expected him to stand up, mutter some awkward platitude about boundaries, and leave me to my misery so I could finish icing my ruined wrists in private. He didn't move. The mattress remained dipped under his considerable weight. The scent of cedar and ozone thickened in the cramped space of my bedroom, no longer just a stale trace on a borrowed pillow, but a live, pulsing presence. It was suffocating. It was everything my body had been blindly seeking for the past 3 weeks, and having it right here entirely awake and aware made my stomach twist with nausea. "You think I didn't know?" His voice was a low, rough rumble. It didn't sound disgusted. It sounded tired. I flinched, my head snapping up. I turned to look at him over my shoulder, my right hand still cradled defensively against my chest. "What?" Hayes was staring at the broken nylon strap resting on the sheets. He picked up the snapped metal buckle, turning the ruined mechanism over in his large, calloused fingers. The ambient light from the hallway caught the grease stains permanently etched into the lines of his skin. He didn't look at me immediately. He seemed perfectly absorbed in the broken metal, as if it held the answers to a very complicated mechanical failure. "I'm a light sleeper, Ian," he said quietly, tossing the broken buckle onto the nightstand. It landed with a sharp clatter. "You think you're stealthy. You're not. You shuffle. You drag your feet when you're under. The floorboards right outside my door squeak. I hear you coming every single time." The blood drained entirely from my face. A cold, prickling sweat broke out across the back of my neck. You were awake the first time, yeah. I woke up when you opened my door. I almost threw a lamp at you." He finally looked up, his pale green eyes locking onto mine. The intensity in them stripped away every layer of cynical armor I had meticulously built over the past year. "I saw you stand there for a minute, completely out on your feet. Then you curled up on the rug like a stray dog. I didn't know what to do. I figured if I woke you up, you'd panic. So I let you sleep. And the second time," I asked, my voice barely a raspy whisper. "I heard you coming," he repeated flatly. I stayed still. "Why didn't you lock your door?" I demanded, a sudden irrational flash of anger burning through my humiliation. If you knew I was doing it, why didn't you just lock the damn door, Hayes? You could have stopped this. You could have saved me from... I gestured weakly to the remaining nylon straps dangling from the iron headboard with my good hand. From doing this. Hayes stood up abruptly. The sudden movement made me instinctively shrink back against the headboard. He was massive in the small room, his broad shoulders blocking out the light from the hallway. He looked down at me, his jaw working as if he was chewing on a piece of gravel. Because my door doesn't have a lock, he said, his voice dropping into a dangerously quiet register. It has a latch, a heavy brass latch on the inside. You can't turn it from the hall. It has to be engaged from the inside. He took a step closer. The heat radiating off his skin was palpable. I left it unlatched, Ian, on purpose. My breath hitched. The room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. I stared up at him, my brain scrambling to process the words, trying to find the joke, the misdirection, the cynical punchline. There wasn't one. His face was entirely open-stripped of the brooding, detached roommate persona he wore every day. I'm going to get some ice, he muttered, turning on his heel. Don't move. He walked out of the room, his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall toward the kitchen. I sat there utterly paralyzed. My right wrist was throbbing with a dull, vicious ache, the skin bruised a dark, angry purple, where the nylon had dug into the tendons. But the physical pain was secondary to the massive shifting tectonic plates in my reality. I left it unlatched, on purpose. He wanted me there. The thought was terrifying. It dismantled the entire narrative I had built. I wasn't just a victim of a failing endocrine system imposing my unconscious will on an unwilling alpha. I was participating in a silent nocturnal negotiation that we were both actively refusing to acknowledge in the daylight. He was lonely. I was stressed. Biology had provided the excuse, and we had both in our own cowardly ways taken it. I heard the freezer door open and shut, followed by the clatter of ice cubes hitting a plastic bag. A minute later, Hayes reappeared in the doorway. He was carrying a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a clean dish towel and a small tube of antiseptic cream from the bathroom. He didn't ask for permission. He sat back down on the edge of the mattress right next to my hip and reached out. "Give me your hand," he ordered softly. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to pull away, to rebuild the walls, to insist I could take care of myself. But I was exhausted. The adrenaline crash was hitting me hard, leaving me trembling and hollowed out. Slowly, I uncurled my right arm from my chest and extended it toward him. His touch was shockingly gentle. For a guy who spent his days wrestling heavy machinery and tearing down engine blocks, his fingers were incredibly precise. He supported my forearm with his left hand, his thumb resting against the inside of my elbow. With his right hand, he pressed the wrapped bag of frozen peas against the angry purple welt on my wrist. The cold was a sharp, brilliant shock that instantly dulled the burning pain. I let out a long, shaky breath, my shoulders dropping an inch. "You're an idiot," Hayes said quietly, keeping his eyes on my wrist. It wasn't an insult. It sounded more like a weary observation. Nylon cargo straps. Really? You could have severed a nerve. You could have lost use of your hand. I panicked. I admitted, staring at his dark, messy hair. Up close, he smelled even better. It wasn't fair. "I thought you were going to kick me out, break the lease, tell the landlord I was a liability." Hayes scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "Why the hell would I do that?" "Because alphas don't want needy omegas treating them like a biological pacifier." I snapped the words tumbling out before I could catch them. "We have an arrangement, Hayes. We pay the rent. We avoid each other. We survive. I broke the rules. I invaded your space." He finally looked up, his green eyes flashing with sudden sharp annoyance. "Is that what you think this is, a lease agreement?" "It's literally a lease agreement," I countered, gesturing to the room around us. "We signed a piece of paper." Hayes reached out and grabbed my left hand, pulling it toward him. He squeezed my fingers tightly, forcing me to stop gesturing, forcing me to anchor to him. "Forget the paper. Look at me. I did. I hated it, but I did. I don't care about the space, he said, his voice lowering, the gravelly edge returning. I work 14 hours a day in a shop that smells like burning oil and metal shavings. I come home and this place is quiet. It's empty. Then 3 weeks ago I wake up and you're there. You smelled like panic and bitter almonds. And I knew why you were there. I know how the cycle works, Ian. He shifted his grip, moving the ice pack slightly to cover a different bruised section of my wrist. I could have woken you up. I could have sent you back. But I didn't want to. I liked that you were there. It felt right. It felt grounding. So I let you stay. And the next time I left the latch off. He paused, swallowing hard. I was a coward. I should have said something during the day. I should have asked you how you were doing, but you're so damn guarded all the time. You look at me like I'm a threat every time we cross paths in the kitchen. I don't look at you like a threat, I muttered defensively, looking down at our joined hands. I look at you like a guy who doesn't want to be bothered. I didn't want to be bothered by the rest of the world, Hayes corrected softly. I never said I didn't want to be bothered by you. The air in the room shifted. It was a tangible, heavy thing. The scent of ozone and cedar lost its sharp territorial edge, mellowing into something richer, something deeply soothing. It was a biological response, an alpha attempting to calm a distressed omega, but it didn't feel clinical. It felt incredibly personal. I could feel my own biology reacting to it. The tight, anxious knot in my chest that had been coiled tight for weeks slowly began to loosen. The bitter almond edge of my own scent, sharpened by stress, and fear began to sweeten, softening into something warmer. I hated how easily my body surrendered to him. I hated that a few words and a bag of frozen peas were dismantling the fortress I had built. This is a mistake, I whispered, pulling my left hand out of his grip. I couldn't look at him anymore. I stared at the blank wall opposite the bed. You're feeling protective because you saw me hurt. It's a reflex. You don't actually want this. Don't tell me what I want. Hayes said, his tone firm. He set the frozen peas aside on the mattress. He reached out again, but this time he didn't grab my hand. He placed his large palm flat against my chest, right over my hammering heart. The heat of his skin bled through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. Feel that? He asked. His own heart rate was steady, but there was a deep, resonant hum beneath his skin. The subtle vibrating purr of an alpha who had found something he considered his. It wasn't a conscious action. It was a pure, involuntary biological tell. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the tears that were suddenly threatening to spill over again. Hayes, please. We're totally different. You're a mechanic. I'm an architect. We don't even talk. We don't know each other. We know how to share a space without driving each other crazy. He pointed out, practically his thumb brushing lightly against my collarbone. We know you take your coffee with oat milk and hate the smell of bleach. I know you work yourself into the ground and forget to eat. You know I need an hour of dead silence when I get home from a shift before I can function like a human being. He leaned in closer. The mattress groaned under the shifting weight. We know the important things. He murmured, his face inches from mine. The rest is just details. We can figure out the details. I opened my eyes. He was right there. His pale green eyes were entirely focused, entirely sincere. There was no pity. There was no disgust. There was only a quiet, resolute certainty that anchored me more effectively than any heavy-duty nylon strap ever could. I'm a mess right now. I warned him, my voice cracking. My cycle is totally out of whack. I'm stressed. I'm probably going to lose my job next month when the firm restructures. Okay, Hayes said simply. He didn't offer empty promises about my job. He didn't tell me everything would be magically fine. He just accepted the reality of the mess. And my wrists are going to look like I lost a fight with a lawnmower for at least 2 weeks. I'll buy more frozen peas, he replied, a tiny, rare smirk touching the corner of his mouth. It was the smirk that broke me. The cynical defensive walls I had relied on simply collapsed, dissolving into nothing. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and leaned forward. I rested my forehead against his shoulder. His skin was warm and smelled exactly like the sanctuary my unconscious mind had been chasing for weeks. The moment contact was made, Hayes's arm came up, wrapping securely around my waist. He pulled me flush against his chest, tucking my head under his chin. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The heavy grounding weight of his embrace was exactly what the frayed edges of my nervous system required. The tension drained out of my muscles, leaving me boneless and exhausted. We stayed like that for a long time. The harsh glare of the hallway light spilled across the broken doorframe, illuminating the ruined remnants of my pathetic attempt at self-restraint. The black nylon straps hung uselessly from the iron bed frame, a stark reminder of the desperate lengths I had gone to avoid the very thing I was currently clinging to. "You can't sleep here," Hayes said eventually, his voice vibrating pleasantly against my cheek. "Your mattress is terrible. It feels like a sheet of plywood." I managed a weak, muffled laugh against his collarbone. "It's supposed to be good for lumbar support." "It's terrible," he repeated decisively. He shifted his weight, slowly pulling back just enough to look down at me. "Come to my room. Sleep in a real bed. You won't even have to walk down the hall this time." The invitation hung in the air. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't an alpha giving an order. It was a genuine offer of comfort, completely devoid of pressure or expectation. I looked at the broken door. I looked at the ruined straps. Then I looked at the guy who had systematically dismantled every fear I had without using an ounce of force. "Okay," I agreed softly. Hayes nodded. He picked up the bag of frozen peas, grabbed the tube of antiseptic cream, and stood up. He didn't make a big show of it. He didn't sweep me into his arms like some tragic hero. He just waited for me to slide off the terrible mattress, stood by my side, and walked with me out of the room. We walked down the narrow, creaky hallway together. The floorboards protested under our combined weight, the very sound he claimed had given me away every single night. We reached his door. The heavy brass latch he had mentioned hung loose and unengaged against the wood. Hayes pushed the door open, revealing the dark, familiar space. The scent of his room was overwhelmingly comforting, a concentrated dose of the grounding presence that had finally settled my chaotic biology. I walked in. I didn't curl up on the floor at the foot of the bed. I didn't nest on his discarded laundry. I climbed directly onto the mattress, sliding under the heavy duvet. Hayes followed, setting the peas and cream on the nightstand. He turned off the small bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He slid under the covers next to me. The space was tight, but it didn't feel claustrophobic. It felt secure. He reached out in the dark, finding my uninjured left hand. He tangled his fingers with mine, pulling my arm across his chest. "Go to sleep, Ian." He murmured, his voice heavy with his own exhaustion. I closed my eyes. The phantom vines that had dragged me down into the ice in my nightmares were gone. The cold fog had dissipated. There was only the steady, rhythmic heartbeat beneath my palm, the warm scent of cedar, and the quiet, undeniable truth that I didn't need to fight my gravity anymore. I had finally found exactly where I was meant to land. Morning arrived not with a jarring synthetic alarm, but with the slow creeping warmth of city sunlight filtering through cheap Venetian blinds. I woke up gradually. My mind was heavy sluggish from the emotional exhaustion of the night before. My right wrist pulsed with a dull, manageable ache. It was a ghost of last night's terrifying panic, a grounding reminder that I wasn't dreaming. My head rested against a solid, warm chest that rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Hayes. He was already awake. I could tell by the measured, deliberate pattern of his breathing and the slight protective tension in the heavy arm wrapped securely around my waist. He smelled like deep sleep and morning musk, the heavy cedar notes muted but ever present in the sheets. I didn't pull away. The cynic in me, the survivor who meticulously controlled every variable of his life, wanted to scramble out of the bed. I wanted to throw on my armor, lock my ruined door, and pretend the sheer vulnerability of the night before had been a fever dream induced by severe sleep deprivation. but my biology was humming a completely different tune. It felt profoundly settled, quiet. The frantic preheat anxiety that had been buzzing under my skin like a live wire for the past 3 weeks was entirely gone. "You're awake," Hayes murmured. His voice was thick, a low gravelly rumble that vibrated directly through my own chest. "Unfortunately," I rasped back, my throat dry. "How's the wrist?" I shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at my shoulder, and lifted my right arm from beneath the heavy duvet. The bruising was spectacular. A dark, angry band of purple and yellow wrapped entirely around the joint, marking exactly where the nylon webbing had bitten into the flesh. "It looks like I survived a kidnapping attempt," I noted dryly. "It hurts less than I thought it would, though." Hayes let out a short, heavy breath that might have been a laugh. He untangled his long legs from mine and sat up, rubbing a large, calloused hand over his face. The sheet pooled around his waist. The morning light caught the pale silver scars scattered across his broad shoulders, remnants of a life spent wrestling with sharp metal and heavy engines. He looked rough. He looked tired. And he looked entirely solid. "I'll make coffee," he said, swinging his legs over the side of the mattress. His bare feet hit the floorboards with a soft thud. "And I'll find something better than frozen peas for that bruising. I think I have some arnica cream in the bathroom cabinet." I watched him walk out of the room. The apartment felt fundamentally different. The sterile, shared space tension that had defined our living arrangement for a year was gone, replaced by a strange, heavy domesticity. I didn't feel like an intruder in his bedroom. I didn't feel like a roommate who had crossed a line. I felt like I belonged there. It was a terrifying, wonderful realization. I pushed myself up, grinding my teeth slightly as my wrist took a fraction of my body weight, and followed him into the kitchen. Hayes was standing by the counter, measuring coffee grounds into the filter of our cheap machine. He wore his gray sweatpants and nothing else. The silence between us wasn't strained anymore. It was just comfortable. It was the silence of two people who had stripped away the bullshit. "I have to go to work today," I said, leaning my left shoulder against the door frame. Hayes paused, the plastic scoop hovering over the coffee tin. He glanced at me over his shoulder, his green eyes dropping to my swollen wrist. "With your arm looking like that, I draw floor plans on a computer. I don't need to lift anything heavier than a wireless mouse." I crossed my arms, tucking my injured hand carefully against my ribs. "Plus, the firm is doing major restructuring next month. Layoffs are coming. If I call in sick today, I might as well drive over there and pack my desk into a cardboard box." He turned around, wiping his hands on a faded dish towel. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He didn't tell me everything would be fine. He knew the brutal reality of the corporate grind just as well as I did. "Wear long sleeves," he advised flatly. "And don't push it. If the tendon starts burning, you stop typing." "Yes, sir," I muttered, but the sarcasm lacked its usual defensive bite. He smirked, turning back to the coffee maker and hitting the power button. "Sit down. I'm making eggs." We ate breakfast at the small, scratched kitchen table. We didn't talk about the broken door down the hall. We didn't talk about the cargo strap still anchored to my iron bed frame. The heavy conversation had already happened in the dark when we were both too exhausted to lie to each other. Now we were just figuring out the daylight mechanics of our new reality. When I finally went to my own room to get dressed, I actively avoided looking at the bed. The sight of the black nylon hanging limply from the metal spindles made my stomach churn with a sudden wave of nausea. I pulled a crisp white button-down shirt from my closet, carefully sliding my arms through the sleeves and buttoning the cuffs tightly to hide the dark bruising. Before I left the apartment, Hayes stopped me in the narrow entryway. He was already dressed in his heavy canvas work pants and a faded black t-shirt, his boots laced tight. He didn't say a word. He just reached out his rough, warm hand, coming to rest on the back of my neck for a brief, incredibly grounding second. His thumb brushed deliberately against my scent gland. A claiming touch. "I'll be home by 6, he said, dropping his hand. "Me too," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. I walked out of the apartment building and into the busy, chaotic city morning. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm against my ribs. I smelled like him. The heavy protective scent of cedar and ozone clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. It was a silent warning label to the rest of the world and a powerful comfort blanket for me. The architectural firm was a glass and steel panopticon of pure, unadulterated stress. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets. The air conditioning was perpetually set to freeze, turning the open-plan office into a sterile icebox. Normally walking into the bullpen felt like stepping into a shark tank while bleeding. The anxiety of the impending layoffs hung in the stale, recirculated air, making everyone irritable and territorial. Today was entirely different. I walked to my desk, dropping my leather satchel onto the ergonomic chair. My coworker, a high-strung beta named Greg, looked up from his dual monitors. His eyes widened slightly. He blinked subtly, sniffing the air. "Morning, Ian," Greg said. His tone was strangely subdued, completely lacking its usual frantic, gossipy edge. He looked at me with a new, subtle layer of respect. Or maybe it was sheer caution. "Morning," I replied flatly. I logged into my workstation, wincing as a sharp twinge of pain shot up my right arm when I gripped the mouse. I adjusted my posture immediately, keeping my wrist perfectly straight to avoid straining the inflamed tendons. It took exactly an hour for the shift in office dynamics to become painfully obvious. Our project manager, a notoriously aggressive and overbearing alpha named Bradley, stopped by my desk. Bradley usually communicated through bark demands, unreasonable deadlines, and a looming physical posture that was designed to intimidate. He operated on the assumption that omegas in the corporate world were inherently soft targets. I braced myself for the usual harsh critique on the commercial complex drafts. Bradley approached, opening his mouth to speak. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. He stood about 2 feet away from my desk, his posture suddenly going rigid. His nostrils flared. He caught the scent. The complex primitive social hierarchy of our biology played out in a silent, invisible clash of pheromones right there in the middle of the bullpen. My own bitter almond scent, usually sharp with stress, was heavily masked by Hayes's cedar and ozone. It wasn't just a lingering, accidental smell. It was an active territorial claim. It told Bradley clearly and unequivocally that I was spoken for. And it told him that the alpha who claimed me was darker, heavier, and far more dominant than a middle management architect in a tailored suit. Bradley cleared his throat, taking a distinct half-step backward. "Ian, the drafted elevations for the lobby redesign, are they ready?" His tone was polite, restrained. He wasn't looming over my shoulder. He was giving me physical space. "I'll have them uploaded to the main server by noon," I said, keeping my eyes on my monitor and my voice perfectly level. "Great, no rush. Just let me know when they're up." Bradley gave a tight, awkward nod and practically marched away to his glass-walled office. I stared after him, utterly dumbfounded. I slowly looked down at my hands. The heavy, protective weight of Hayes's scent wasn't just an emotional comfort. It was literal armor. For the first time in my professional life, I wasn't fighting an exhausting uphill battle against my own biology. I wasn't being dismissed as a fragile omega or bullied by territorial alphas looking to assert dominance. I was virtually untouchable. The cynical modern man in me absolutely hated that I needed an alpha's scent to command basic respect in the workplace. It felt regressive. It felt horribly archaic. But the exhausted, overworked guy who just wanted to do his job in peace, he was practically weeping with relief. The rest of the day passed with shocking ease. I finished the drafts without a single interruption. My wrist throbbed constantly, a dull, aching reminder of my own desperate idiocy. But I managed the pain with ibuprofen and careful movements. When 5 o'clock finally hit, I didn't linger to show dedication. I packed my bag, completely ignored the frantic, desperate energy of the bullpen, and walked out to the elevators. The commute home felt agonizingly slow. The subway was packed tight, smelling of damp wool, spilled coffee, and collective exhaustion, but I barely registered the discomfort. I was hyper-focused on the destination. When I finally unlocked the apartment door, the rich smell of garlic and frying meat hit me, immediately washing away the stench of the city. The hallway lights were on. The low familiar hum of a sports broadcast drifted from the living room television. Hayes was in the kitchen. He had traded his heavy work boots for bare feet, but he was still wearing his grease-stained canvas pants and a fresh gray t-shirt. He was standing at the stove pushing sliced steak around in a cast-iron skillet with a wooden spatula. He looked over his shoulder as I pushed the door shut. The pale green of his eyes caught the warm overhead light. "You made it," he said, his voice a low, welcoming rumble over the sizzle of the meat. "I made it," I agreed softly. I dropped my bag by the door. I didn't go to my room. I didn't lock myself away to decompress in isolation like I had every day for the past year. I walked straight into the kitchen, stopping directly beside him. The heat of the gas burner radiated against my side. Hayes smelled like engine grease, honest sweat, and raw, unfiltered alpha. He smelled like absolute safety. I leaned my forehead against his shoulder. He didn't miss a single beat. He dropped the wooden spatula onto the counter, turning his body to wrap both arms securely around me. He pulled me flush against his chest, burying his face in my neck, inhaling deeply. A low, incredibly satisfied vibration started deep in his chest, rumbling physically through my own ribs. "How was the wrist?" he asked softly, his lips moving against my collar. "Hurt all day." I admitted, wrapping my arms around his waist and sinking into his warmth. But Bradley didn't yell at me once. Hayes pulled back slightly, looking down at me with a knowing, distinctly smug smirk. He caught the scent. He backed off like I was covered in radioactive waste. I sighed, resting my chin on his chest. It's seriously annoying that our world works like that. It's biology, Ian. You can't fight it. Hayes raised a large hand, his thumb gently tracing the sharp line of my jaw. You tried tying yourself to a cast-iron bed frame to fight it. Remember? How exactly did that work out for you? Shut up, I muttered, but I couldn't stop the genuine, exhausted smile from pulling at the corners of my lips. Go sit down, he ordered, gently pressing a firm kiss to my forehead. Dinner's almost ready. I walked into the living room and collapsed onto the worn, comfortable sofa. I looked down the hallway. My bedroom door was still broken, the splintered pine, a harsh testament to last night's violence. I knew the black nylon straps were still hanging there in the dark. I didn't care. I wasn't going to sleep in that room tonight. I wasn't going to sleepwalk. I was exactly where I needed to be, wide awake and entirely anchored. Saturday morning arrived with the sharp whine of a power drill. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh sunlight streaming through the Venetian blinds. I was alone in the bed, my right wrist now fading into a mottled canvas of yellow and pale green, throbbed with a faint, manageable ache. I stretched my joints, popping in the quiet room. I threw off the heavy duvet, grabbed a worn gray t-shirt from the floor, and walked out into the hallway. The air smelled of dark roast coffee and fresh sawdust. Hayes was standing in the doorway of my old bedroom. He wore a faded pair of denim jeans and a tight black undershirt heavily dusted with wood shavings. He held a piece of sanded pine in one hand and a thick brass door hinge in the other. He had already removed the splintered door frame. "Morning," he grunted around a pair of silver screws held carefully between his teeth. "You're fixing it," I said, leaning my shoulder against the opposite wall. He took the screws out of his mouth. Landlord would charge us triple to do it himself. Plus the guy uses cheap materials. If I'm putting a door back on its hinges, it's going to hold forever. I looked past his broad shoulders into the room. It felt like looking at a bizarre museum exhibit of my own pathetic history. The iron bed frame still sat in the center, an imposing black cage. The nylon cargo straps dangled uselessly from the metal spindles exactly where I had abandoned them days ago. They looked utterly ridiculous in the morning light, a desperate, embarrassing monument to a guy who genuinely thought he could outsmart his own biology with camping gear. Hayes followed my gaze. He set the heavy drill down on the floorboards. He didn't ask for permission. He just walked into the room, his heavy boots thudding softly against the floor. He stopped at the side of the bed. He grabbed the left strap, his large hands easily working the metal release lever that had completely defeated me. The buckle clicked open. He unthreaded the thick black nylon from the iron spindle. He tossed it onto the hardwood floor. Then he moved to the right side, picking up the strap he had ripped apart with sheer force. He gathered the broken pieces of webbing and the cracked cam buckle. He walked back out to the hallway and dropped the entire mess into a black garbage bag sitting by the wall. "Bed's still terrible," he noted, casually picking the drill back up. "We should throw it out entirely, turn the room into an office." It was a practical suggestion. It was also a massive, terrifying leap of faith. Turning my bedroom into an office meant I was permanently vacating it. It meant my clothes were moving into his closet. It meant the lease agreement we signed as strangers was officially dead. I stared at the black garbage bag. The nylon straps were gone. The physical anchor was gone. "An office," I repeated, slowly testing the heavy weight of the words. "You need a place to draw your floor plans," Hayes reasoned. He aligned the new pine frame against the drywall. "Can't hunch over the kitchen table forever. It's bad for your back, and I'm tired of sweeping eraser shavings out of the tile grout." I let out a short, authentic laugh. The cynical panic that usually accompanied big life changes simply didn't rise. My chest felt entirely clear. The heavy protective scent of ozone and cedar in the apartment grounded me completely. I wasn't sleepwalking into this. I was walking in with my eyes wide open. "Okay," I said. Hayes paused. The drill whirred to a stop. He looked over his shoulder, his pale green eyes locking onto mine. He didn't smile, but the tension around his mouth softened completely. Yeah, throw the bed out. Build me a desk." The corporate bloodbath happened exactly 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The air conditioning in the bullpen was aggressively cold, but everyone was sweating. Human Resources had commandeered a corner office, and the steady, grim parade of architects and junior draftsmen walking in and out felt like a funeral march. I sat at my desk, my right wrist completely healed quietly, rendering a complex 3D model of a concrete parking garage. I wasn't panicking. For the first time in my career, the sheer terror of losing my job was eclipsed by a strange, unshakable baseline of peace. When my desk phone finally blinked red, I answered it on the first ring. "Ian, my office." "5 minutes," Bradley barked sharply. I saved my file. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles out of my dark slacks, and walked across the silent bullpen. Bradley was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, looking incredibly stressed. His own alpha scent, usually sharp and dominating, was sour with corporate anxiety. He gestured for me to sit. "I'm going to make this quick, Ian," Bradley said, rubbing his temples aggressively. "The firm is bleeding cash fast. We're terminating 15% of the floor today. I understand," I replied evenly. Bradley looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not on the list. You're one of our fastest draftsmen. But moving forward, we're restructuring the teams completely. You're being moved to the commercial development sector under me. It means a 50-hour minimum work week, mandatory weekends until the end of the quarter." He leaned forward, planting his elbows heavily on the desk, expecting me to fold. He expected the quiet, compliant Omega who used to take on double shifts just to avoid a direct confrontation. I looked at him. I smelled the stale coffee on his breath and the sour stress filling the room. Then I breathed in slowly through my nose, catching the faint residual scent of cedar clinging stubbornly to my own shirt collar. "No," I said simply. Bradley blinked hard. He physically recoiled as if I had suddenly been slapped. "No, Ian, I don't think you grasp the harsh reality of the situation. This isn't a friendly negotiation." "It is," I corrected calmly, leaning back in my chair. "I'm a good draftsman. You just said so yourself. But I don't work weekends anymore. And I leave at exactly 5 o'clock. If that doesn't fit the new structure, you can add my name to the termination list and process my severance package right now." The silence in the office was deafening. Bradley stared at me desperately, searching for the bluff. He didn't find one. I wasn't chained to this job anymore. I wasn't terrified of the financial freefall. I had a permanent anchor at home. If I got fired today, I would figure it out tomorrow. Hayes wouldn't panic. He would just ask what we were having for dinner. Bradley's jaw tightened. He looked down at the paperwork on his desk, then back up at me. 5 o'clock. No weekends. That's the deal. He sighed heavily and bitterly. Fine. Get back to work. I walked out of the office at exactly 5 o'clock. The sun was still high in the sky, casting a warm golden haze over the busy city streets. I took the crowded subway home, listening to the rhythmic clatter of the steel tracks, feeling significantly lighter than I had in years. When I unlocked the apartment door, the familiar smell of roasted garlic and engine grease welcomed me instantly. The new door down the hallway was perfectly hung solid and secure. Behind it, a heavy oak desk sat exactly where the iron bed used to be. Hayes was in the kitchen washing a heavy cast iron skillet in the sink. He wore his thick work pants and a faded gray shirt. He looked over his shoulder as I dropped my leather bag. "You're home on time." He noted casually, his voice a low grounding rumble. "Told my boss I don't do overtime anymore," I said, walking up directly behind him. Hayes turned off the running water. He dried his large calloused hands on a towel and turned around. He leaned back against the counter, pulling me in by the hips. "You didn't get fired?" he asked, one eyebrow raised in mild surprise. "Nope. Turns out they actually need me more than I need them." I looped my arms loosely around his neck, burying my face in the warm crook of his shoulder. The scent of him was overwhelming, rich, and perfectly settled. My own biology hummed in absolute contentment, my bitter almond scent turning completely sweet. "Told you," Hayes murmured gently, pressing a heavy, warm kiss to the side of my neck right over my pulse point. Later that night, we lay together in his bed. The room was dark, quiet, and profoundly safe. The street lamp outside cast a faint amber glow across the worn floorboards. I didn't need nylon cargo straps. I didn't need broken locks. I lay comfortably on my side, my back pressed flush against his broad chest, his heavy arm wrapped tightly around my waist, keeping me perfectly anchored to the mattress. I wasn't a biological cliché. I was just a guy who had finally stopped fighting his own gravity. I closed my eyes. The old floorboards in the hallway remained completely silent. I was already exactly where I wanted to be. That concludes the story of Ian and Hayes. Thank you for joining us on this deeply emotional, grounded Omegaverse journey. If you loved watching Ian break down his cynical walls and find his true anchor in Hayes, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with fellow BL fans who appreciate real, raw storytelling without the tired cliches. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming premium audio dramas. Your amazing support always keeps these stories alive. Drop a comment below with your favorite moment. See you tomorrow.